When you think about your hair, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Is it elegance? Is it excellence? If it's not, if you're giving more sadness, distress, underwhelmment, well, then you need to go on over to Holmes Wholesale, where Danielle from D&H Hair Care has the answer that you have been looking for. She has created, with her two hands, a immaculate line of hair care products that are 100% vegan. That is right. Vegan products to put in your hair. Eat Golden Corral if you will, but put goodness in your hair. My personal favorites, as most of you know by now if you've been listening to this show, are the pH Balanced Shampoo and Conditioner and the High Shine Glossifier Oil Spray. Amazing. And the smell. Well, the smell can only be captured by Jean-Michel Basquiat. It can only be captured in the words of Ella Fitzgerald. Only they can convey the glory of this smell of Idris Elba's bedsheets. If you go on over to Holmes Wholesale, while you're there, use the code CRP10 and you will get 10% off of your order. HolmesWholesale.com is the website. Let's start the show. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. I am your host, Rashida Green, and this is the show for and about environmental justice and those that fight the fight with skin as melanated as the days are long. Knowledge is power, and we are breaking down stereotypes one episode at a time. Hello, I'm back without wine. So for this episode, as I may have mentioned, I participated in the National Oceanic Summit, and this is a conference that was hosted by The Economist. And there were a couple of really great takeaways, specifically related to aquaculture, which we're going to be talking about, as well as a federal bill that is also part of this discussion too. A woman named Donna Lanzetta, she is actually from Manna Fish Farms based in New York, spoke about the Aqua Act, and that's aqua with 2 A's at the end. And it's saying that this particular bill should be supported. So I said, let me do some searching. So she also mentioned that there is a lot of misinformation about farmed fish. And I thought, okay, so I think I need to do a little bit of research. So that's the premise of this episode. Before we get there, we're going to give some flowers. And the person that I would like to give flowers to today, I think I just want to give flowers to Beyonce. My Black is King mug finally came. Also, and on a more serious note, I just want to give a shout out to all women of color, all of us, because in one way or another, we have been over-sexualized because of our skin color, because of our facial features. We have been minimized because of them, and just shout out to us as a collective. And before I get into the meat and potatoes, or the fish and potatoes, or fish and grits of this episode, I want to give some updates about the bills that are going on right now. There's one in particular that's had some facelift, if you will. And then there's just a few others that are still pending, but I just wanted to refresh because I know that, again, if you are even putting your pinky toe into the legislative session, you already know that that water is frigid, that there are bills coming out the wazoo, and it's very hard to keep track. First bill is HB 670, giving everyone the pressure. This is the Police Reform and Accountability Act of 2021. In this bill, as a reminder, it's calling for the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. It puts the Baltimore City Police Department's management in the hands of the city of Baltimore, not the state. That no-knock search warrants can be issued under certain circumstances, and that there would be free public education for those who want to become a police officer. And the changes have been pretty extensive changes. So search warrants can be issued with the specification that they can be issued between the hours of 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. And of course, as mentioned before, no-knock search warrants are permitted if requested upon certain provisions. But again, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm just going to state, and then I'm going to say. So the last piece is funds are available for scholarships, or funds would be allotted to go towards scholarships for those who want to study criminal justice to become a police officer while they're in college. And funds are also available for police officers who are doing, obviously still on the job, and yet they want to go back to school. From my very limited insider track, people are not pleased. I am not hearing good things. And I mean, and even I said it, and I know other folks have said it as well, that it doesn't go far enough. I mean, I did say the last time we talked about this particular bill that there are few states where no knock search warrants are not allowed. Oregon in particular is the state, and then obviously Louisville, Kentucky, their police department cannot issue no knock search warrants. But obviously clearly now there is a lot of room for this to be expanded. So that's the latest and the greatest on that particular bill. And we'll be keeping our eye on this one because this has definitely become a hot issue. Or it's been a hot issue. It's just that the bill was not very great. Then it got gutted and people are mad. And I understand that. Next is House Bill 139, which is the Law Enforcement Officers' Use of Force. So this was cross-filed. It's also Senate Bill 626. It is still pending in the House Judiciary Committee, and this is the bill that would allow people to seek relief if they filed a use of force complaint against an officer. HB 671. So there was a hearing on this particular bill, and it's pending also in the House Judiciary, and this is the Public Information Personnel Investigation Records. So in essence, this bill would allow complaints against an officer to be available, and that also that their record, if they've got if they have a personnel record in which there were complaints made, those can be visible, because right now under the Public Information Act they are protected. And yes, so there was a hearing, still pending. Keep your eyeballs open. Last but not least is House Bill 101, which was the Heat and Eat program. And this is supposed to be part of the SNAP program, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is part of Health and Human Services. And this particular bill would allow those who already have SNAP to be eligible for the Heat and Eat program, which provides a standard energy bill allowance. And this has moved from moving into the Finance Committee, and it passed in the House. So things are moving. Slowly but surely, at least on these little bitty bills that I picked up. So let's get into it. I mentioned the AQUA Act. And so that stands for Advancing the Quality and Understanding of American Aquaculture Act. It was actually introduced in 2020, but didn't really go anywhere. It was a bipartisan bill. Marco Rubio Roger Wicker and Brian Schatz, so 2 Republicans and a Democrat, respectively, wrote this bill. So in essence, the bill would direct the Department of Commerce to create an Office of Offshore Aquaculture within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is NOAA, to coordinate regulatory, scientific outreach and international issues related to aquaculture. It is to uphold the existing environmental standards while providing regulatory certainty and clarity to the industry. Okay. It would include a set of national standards to give development of offshore aquaculture and aquaculture management plans. So let's pull the car over. Let's just pull the car right on over and back up just a taste. So what the hell is aquaculture? What is it? So it is basically farm fishing. That's just the fancy name. It's also called aqua farming. It is farming of fish, crustaceans, mollusks, aquatic plants, algae, and other organisms. And it involves cultivating fresh and saltwater populations under controlled conditions. Okay? And this is different in commercial fishing, because commercial fishing is for harvesting of wild fish. Also, aquaculture would allow fishing in federal waters, and it is being boasted as part of this bill, the Aqua Act. It's being boasted as an opportunity to close the global food security gap because right now, 3 billion people depend on seafood as their primary food source. But we know, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, we know that we've got a growing population. So we have to find ways to develop and cultivate more sources of food. And that's in essence what Donna was saying in her talk. That's part of a lot of what the Economist's entire presentations, a lot of them were about, is how we can develop aquaculture. And in essence, just to go back to what we're saying about the kind of food that we would need to sustain ourselves, we would need 50% more food to sustain our growing population. And right now, only 2% of our caloric intake, the calories that we eat, come from aquaculture. And as I said, we have a very high demand on land agriculture, which is livestock. And I won't go too deep, but what I will say is that we have talked about on this show the dependence that we have on land agriculture, specifically for cows, chickens, and pigs. That is just ass gas going straight into the atmosphere. Not to mention it, and I'll get into this more too, is that it takes a lot of energy to power these places. It's a lot of methane going straight into the atmosphere, which is further, causing the deterioration of the atmosphere and of course causing global warming. And Katarina Martins from Maui, and that's MOWI, and Maui is a Norwegian seafood company. She noted that fish are climate friendly, and they are climate friendly because they don't have to have their body temperature regulated. They can do it themselves. So that means that they use less energy. And that was what I was mentioning about, in addition to the methane that's going into the atmosphere from the waste, there's also the requirements to keep a regulated temperature for certain livestock. So going back to the Aqua Act, it would have established a national plan and create like a roadmap in essence. And NOAA would be given the ability to provide an identified entity to secure financing for aquaculture operations and also fund research for innovation and growth. So this sounds fairly reasonable, right? I mean, we got a problem. People are hungry and we can just give them the fish and the bread. Well, that will be great, but there's some pushback. So organizations such as Friends of the Earth are not having it. They believe it could bring industrial fishing to local fishing communities and that there is a chance for transgenic and genetically modified fishies to get into the local ecosystems and do what they do, which is eat everything, pretty much eat everything and mess it up. There's also concern that this act would give one organization power to create this national plan, as it mentioned, but also give them power to allow companies to bypass federal regulations because they are letting them use federal waters as possible areas for aquaculture. And lastly, fish do poop. They can regulate their body temperatures, but they poop, right? So that wastewater, it's got to go somewhere. And so there's the risk of contamination, and that is a concern for organizations like Friends of the Earth. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about some of the indigenous practices that involve aquaculture, and also some that have benefited from the model of aquaculture. So Hawaii is one of the first places to institute aquaculture with the use of fish ponds. They've practiced this already. And zooming out even further and heading on over to Australia, specifically the Warui Goulburn Islands in Australia, there's an Aboriginal community there, and they are participating in the growing interest for bringing seafood economy to indigenous communities. So back in 1996, Jesus Christ, I want to go back to 1996. Please take me. So back in 2016, black lip oysters were brought to this particular island, this community, and they started to flourish. And now it's created some revenue for this Aboriginal community. There were 90,000 juvenile oysters being grown in 2018, and this was all supported by a local farm and had full community support. And again, they were able to turn a profit, and it is so far sustainable for them to not only to manage, but sustainable for the local environment. So we've come to the crossroads. And I know it sounds like I've talked about like 15 different things, which is probably true. But, I really wanted to take this episode and use this as a chance to talk about the water, the ocean, from a different perspective. In the past, I've talked about it from more of the science perspective. And in this episode, I really wanted to focus on the economic side. I've talked about our population and how it's growing. And specifically, we are projected to reach 8.6 billion people by the year 2030. So we do have to find different methods to feed folk. We do. And bringing in something else, because of the pandemic, more than 42 million people may experience food insecurity. And this is especially true of households with children. I talked about the Heat and Eat program, the House Bill 101. Well, SNAP is a federal program, but many households who are experiencing or who may experience food insecurity are ineligible for federal nutrition programs, and they have to depend on local sources of support. So if we're talking in this episode about possible methods to create food and, for some, revenue in a sustainable way. And yes, I do believe we are going to have to find innovative ways, like what's going on in Australia, to solve these problems. I would say chiefly my main concern is just how much corporations are playing a role in this effort? And are we focusing the best, not only for what we have, for what we need economically, but are we doing the best for the environment too? And I think this is just going to merit a lot more research. This is an ongoing discussion and an ongoing topic that I want to cover. And I just thought this would be a nice way to, to wet the palate a little bit. But there are some concerns here, and I appreciated the summit, the National Oceanic Summit, because these terms, aquaculture and also blue economy, were used a lot. And I had no idea what they meant. And even learning a little bit more about what aquaculture is, like, for example, there are over 250 species of sea animals that are farmed in aquaculture, and it's only going to intensify. It's only going to grow, and millions of people do rely on aquaculture for their livelihoods. And unfortunately, other countries like Ghana don't have the proper infrastructure to capture what's called ocean data, and have a high instances of illegal fishing, which makes it even more difficult for them to get a good capture of data so they could possibly institute some sustainable practices there. So there's a lot of problems, right? And we're working towards solutions. I am going to do a little more investigating into this because I think there are other solutions that maybe are a little bit better than what's on the table. And, I'm always on the lookout for that. In terms of shout outs today, I would just say shout out to The Economist. I did really, for what I could watch, which was brief, but what I could watch of the week-long amazing panel discussions and seminars, I definitely learned a lot. So shout out to them. And actually, shout out to my guest in resident, Professor Seema, who actually referred this conference to me in the first place. So this, again, one hand washes another. So that is going to conclude another episode of The Crossroads. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Crossroads Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook, Crossroads Pod C1. Also, please join my Patreon. Actually, and thank you to everyone who has already joined my Patreon. I'm going to be lining up my shout outs for next week. So get on in there and sign on up. And we'll see you again at the Crossroads.